The GST rate conundrum, that's what we are calling it today. It almost seemed like a fairy tale for the last 2 or 3 months. We kept saying it was so near yet so far for so many years. And all of a sudden, the constitutional amendment bill sailed through both houses of parliament 3 4 months back. And we almost thought with the all the statements of the finance minister, the government, the prime minister himself, telling all the bureaucrats that April 1 date, April 1, 2017 is sacrosanct, that has to be met, and the sort of decisions, the meetings, all the signals that were emanating from North Block seem to suggest that yes, we will meet the April 1 to 2017 target, however tough it may be. A little bit of reality check sunk in yesterday evening after the 2-day meeting of the GST Council concluded, and for the first time, what I don't think anyone conceived. People thought of a 2-rate structure, possibly a little bit of of course dual control had already been factored in, but with a 4-rate structure, with a cess, and of course absolutely no unanimity on how the dual control is going to work. We are for the first time in the last couple of months seeing some, if not serious differences, at least a little bit of spoke in the wheel and certain tricky, thorny issues that need to be ironed out. Let's quickly go through the headlines in the newspapers today, and after that, we have two of the foremost GST experts, Rohan Shah, Advocate Rohan Shah, and Gautam Doshi, Group MD of Reliance ADAG, both of them who are with us, will give their take on how does the government solve these issues. This is what Economic Times says today. It says, it quotes Mr. Arun Jaitley on saying, on the issue of rates, we have almost converged towards a consensus, and that a consensus would be hammered out in the next GST Council meeting on November 3rd, 4th. But then it goes on to quote him, the rate structure will depend on the source of funds, on the basis of which compensation to the losing states will be funded. After the compensation fund issue is resolved, the rates can be worked out, Mr. Jaitley said, whether the compensation is to be funded out of the rate structure itself or out of some special cess or out of any other source. Once this question is answered, then the rate structure can be determined independently. And then you go to business standard. The business standard says that a decision on the rate for GST was on Wednesday put off to next month, even as the center and states converge towards a consensus on levying a cess on luxury and sin goods in addition to the highest rate of tax in the new regime. The issue of administrative control over assessees would be relooked at. I go straight to Rohan Bhai first. He wrote a column for us yesterday, even as the GST Council meeting was on, and he supported the multi-tier rate structure. And this is what Rohan Bhai you wrote yesterday for us. You said there are several diverse forces which need to be reconciled in the fixation of the rate for GST. 4 of them: 1, perceived threat of inflation; B, the impact that this inflation could have on the elections in 29; C, ensuring enough revenue collection to meet the target of center and states; and D, to reap the economic dividend in terms of anticipated growth on GDP. Rohan Bhai, if you could explain that.
Yeah. So, as set out in the quite clearly, this is not just a linear issue either in terms of national governance or state governance, or in terms of the economy. Clearly, there are various factors at play and various forces to reconcile. One is the factor that there is a threat and a perception, and there is also anecdotal historical evidence in other countries that the introduction of a GST, if the rate is not set right, could lead to inflation. The inflation itself may therefore have an impact, some believe, in terms of the political equation for the next election. So these are 2 factors which obviously need to be looked at. As is the factor that as you look at this, clearly both the state and the center, given the high level of revenue dependence we have in our country, will need to use the GST to maximize the collection up to a point of whatever are their needs. So this again is no secret that this revenue is an important instrument in the economy of both the center and the states. So as far as these factors are concerned, and then there is the well-adverted situation that we bring a GST, we will reap a dividend in terms of the positive impact that it will have on the GDP. Now, when you have so many factors at play, the issue in terms of you're being able to maintain a dual rate becomes a little difficult, because you have a situation of saying that just the revenue neutral rate could not curb the inflation unless it was very low. But if it is going to be 18%, then you certainly needed a lower rate into which most of the items which go into the consumer price index would go. Because only if that happens will you curb the inflation. And if you curb the inflation, it correspondingly has a positive impact in terms of the political scenario. At the same point in time, you need revenue collection, and if you do, then 18 is justified. And some people will tell you that therefore 26 or 40 is also justified, because if you are going to put a lot of items into 12, then how do you collect revenue? You will need a 26 or 40. So I think it is all of these factors which effectively come into play and dictate for us that a multi-tier structure is the need of the hour today. However, what we are looking at as 4 structures, don't forget that there will be exemptions. The PM is on record as saying a significant number of items currently exempted will be exempted. Don't also forget that people are talking a separate rate for petroleum, as also there will be a separate lower rate in the context of gems and jewelry. So what you are having is not just the 4 rates. You probably have even a slightly wider spread of rates. But was there an option to that? Given all of the pulls and pushes, I don't think you had an option to a multi-tier rate. Did you need so many tiers? Well, that's a matter for debate.
Gautam bhai, before I get to some of the questions and some of the comments that some of the other experts and commentators have made, your first take, Gautam bhai. Would you agree with Rohan bhai's well articulated analysis that a multi-tier rate structure is almost inevitable? How do you otherwise combine, merge so many diverse interest needs?
No, I appreciate what Rohan is saying, and I think I agree with what he's saying, that if you want to merge all these interests, if you want to look after the interests of revenue, you want to collect enough tax, you want to make sure that there is no inflation, etc., perhaps you have no choice but to go for multi-tiered structure. But in that case, you are not getting all the best out of GST. What you introduced GST for, what you promised out of GST, you are not getting that. And the other solution is, okay, stick to your 2-tier structure, have 2 rates, and in the process, sacrifice some of these objectives. Maybe lose revenue for a year or 2, make it up by, if you like, a deficit financing, make it up by some other route, by reducing costs, if you have to, because nothing comes without a price. If government wants the advantages of GST, if government wants the growth of GDP, if it has to pay a price in terms of revenue, I think government should be prepared to pay that. But if government says, I want to have my cake and I want to eat it also, then it's a tough call. They have the power, they can do it. So let's see what they really settle for.
Gautam bhai, Rohan bhai, Gautam bhai's comment about the sacrifice, reminded me of this chess game where you sacrifice a pawn, for a larger advantage. Some sacrifice even the queen for a larger advantage later in the game. Gautam bhai is probably suggesting that the government sacrifice revenue in the short term if it wants to see the advantages on GST. But on a serious note, I did talk to one of our good friends who could not join us today on the Hangout, another regular, Mr. P.V. Srinivasan, former head of tax at Wipro, another renowned GST expert who's also championing NASSCOM's cause on GST. And this is what he told me 10 minutes ago. He told me that the multi-tier rate structure with the cess will go against the dream of a common market. A one nation, one tax will then result in multiple taxes for each state. I think the larger point here being, when I went to Delhi last week, you had big hoardings saying one nation, one tax. Rohan bhai, that dream it does not look any closer to being achieved than what it was a few months ago, Rohan bhai.
Quite clearly, the multiplicity of rates and the issue of the cess takes us very far away from what universally most people would regard as a GST or a credible GST. So in the situation in which we are not at the stage of an ideal GST. At the same point in time, what does one nation, one tax mean? If what we are saying is that we are trying to economic unnatural flows of trade based on taxation, and second, that the constitutional scheme of taxation, where taxes and indirect tax could be imposed either by the center or the state, but now you have a GST, which effectively is the one levy subsuming the many levies, then I think on that front, we are still talking of one nation, one tax. If we are looking at it from the yardstick of two other parameters, a small set of rates which will not lead to distortion or classification issues, well, we are not there. We are in a multi-tier structure, and as I said, I personally believe that given all the needs and forces at play, that's needed. The second is the issue in terms of the administration of this tax. And when you have one tax, is it going to be cohesively administered, or are we in a way grabbing at bits and pieces in terms of saying state will do this, center will do this, to the extent that we are probably not talking of a cohesive administration, but talking of administration along the lines of center and state. That to me is a bit of a worry, because that certainly is another thing which eats away at this whole concept of one nation, one tax, one uniform market.
Rohan, I'll quote another paragraph from your article, a few lines. You say that the unpleasant surprise which emerges from yesterday's deliberation is that almost 25% of goods will fall in the 26% rate category. To have such a high quantum of goods fall in a 26% category cuts at the very root of why we need to achieve the transition to GST. The 26% rate and its wide coverage has the potential to create an economic divide based on a price point and an arbitrary perception of what constitutes luxury or conspicuous goods that should suffer a demerit rate of 26%. I think you argued quite forcefully that no longer can washing machine and air conditioners be treated as luxury goods. You think this 26% rate is regressive? Very clearly, Rohan.
I think it has the potential to first affect the credibility of GST. Second, it will bring in some element of ad hocism, because if you start saying that the levy as per price point or as per perception of what is luxury, and therefore what should be taxed at 26%, which is a demerit rate, I think that whole approach creates a sense of unease within industry. B, there will be ad hocism as to what is luxury, what is not, and that both of these factors, to me, go back to the credibility of the GST that we want to bring in. So, there was a perception you will have 40%. Consensually, what we all regard as sin goods will fall there. Everything else will be in 18. But now, if you say that 25 will be in 26, A, it's a very large basket. But B, it's a basket which leaves you with an unpleasant feeling, because you pay tax based on the factor of what somebody else's perception of a luxury or a item of normal consumption is. And I don't think that's a comfortable sense for anybody to go into GST with.
Gautam?
Yeah, it's a tough one. But then again, it's I presume the only reason why it's there is primary reason is revenue. It's not, it's not as if it is not realized what Rohan just said, that you can't have so many goods in such a high rate. You could have had a sin goods rate at 40% and put everything else into one GST rate and let the market decide what is good for the market, what people want to buy and what people don't want to buy. Rather than the government.
Gautam, you're surely not advocating putting washing machine and air conditioner into sin goods now.
No, I'm not. But let us assume that you want to put a high-priced car there. Put it.
Yeah.
I think that's fine.
Yeah, but Gautam, I was coming that in fact, it looks like that's going to happen. But I think, Gautam, last 10 minutes, whatever we've discussed, the math is not adding up somewhere, which is why all the talk of a rate. Then you come to a cess, which I think is going to give, if it is already giving jitters to the industry. If the math is not adding up, Gautam, you are a master at tallying balance sheets. Tell us, what would be your suggestion to the government? How can they resolve this conundrum how can they ensure that this is revenue neutral for everyone?
No, I think that's somewhere which I don't think I can really advise the government or anybody. But really, the issue is, as Rohan said, at least we are getting some of the advantages. Let's assume that on procedure, on the general concept of the tax, at least we are achieving unity across the nation. Then we are halfway there. You don't have a separate excise, a separate service tax, a separate VAT. We are now talking about one tax. So I would assume that we are achieving half of what we wanted to do. And we are giving up the other half and saying that this is something which we will achieve 3 to 5 years hence, not today.
Gautam, as industry, as an industry, as a person, as an executive in one of the big Indian corporate groups, currently, what worries you?
What worries one is the additional charges which are going to come in, particularly. As it is, services were going to pay more just to enter GST. And now you are entering a GST which is as confusing as ever. The whole advantage that you would be the same all over the country in all your acquisitions, purchases, all your planning. Now you have to again think of 10 different things before you decide on a project, before you decide on a purchase, before you decide on your year's annual plan. So, as I said, half the advantage is lost. We are getting only half the advantage. The question is the cost worth it?
Yeah.
There is going to be a pain. GST is not going to come easy. Yeah. The pain is significant. Is it worth it? Now it's very difficult. And that is where we have to evaluate the maths. We have to accept that the second half is not going to come. This government has made up its mind. They are not going to give you that second half today. They may give you after 2019.
Yeah.
If and when they are back in power.
Rohan, Rohan, how would you address Gautam Bhai and the industry sphere?
No, look, I don't think, this is a situation where, you're holding out either governmental action or industrial apprehension. I think all GST, especially in a nation like ours, where you have to understand this is an unprecedented exercise. Something like a GST council is globally unprecedented. Yeah. And, it's a singular achievement in terms of the fact that we have it and it is emerging with consensus. So the issue is you can't sort of completely assuage, the sense of apprehension that industry may have. I would sort of go this far to say that it seems that there is very clear and strong intent on GST, which ultimately we know would be good for the nation. In this phase, I think expectedly there are issues, and those are issues which we would have been foolish not to contemplate. To imagine a GST in India with no hiccups, I think would have been an impossibility. This is part of those hiccups. The question is, what sort of good sense and wisdom prevails to get over these hiccups in these next few days? And whether we are, as Gautam rightly said, we are in a situation where we are harnessing maybe 50%, somebody may say 60% of the benefit. How can the government work towards actually expanding that number to say that, we will get closer to 70, 80? There will always be some element which is missing from the ideal. So from my own perspective here, let's not undermine how much we are achieving with this process. Sure. At the same time, it is not ideal. And to the extent that it is not ideal, this is still work in progress. And I think the people who matter really need to sort of put their heads together to say, how can we up the quotient by which people believe that, this is doing far more good than what we used to have? And how do we ensure that what looks like a 50-60% type deal today actually becomes significantly better? It will never be ideal, but how do we make it better?
Yeah, I think Rohan is basically saying that perfect cannot be the enemy of the good. Absolutely point taking. This is a historic exercise. Nowhere else are you going to have 30 states sitting on a table and trying to hammer home consensus with each having different interests in mind. Having said that, Rohan, let's look at a couple of issues. Number one, the cess. Number two, dual control. On the cess, we don't know. This is to compensate the states in the short term. The worry industry would have is in India, cesses, once they come in, they don't have a history of going so easily.
Yeah, so, 4 or 5 fundamental problems with this. One, you have a well-adverted set of statements made repeatedly that all cesses will be subsumed into the GST. To me, this goes to the credibility of the GST itself, where you say you are going to bring in another cess. Second, the fact that compensation had to be given was always known. The fact that now the source of funds for compensation has become a central issue,
Yeah.
I find it a little surprising. The fact that there was compensation and the fact that it would have to be funded surely could not have been lost on anybody. So from that perspective, to say that the source is now a central issue and that can be met in one of 3 ways, and one of those ways is a cess, to my mind, again, goes back to my issue on credibility. The third issue that worries me is that this is sliding rule cess. If the cess is to be imposed on 26%, and the difference between 26% and whatever was the current tax rate, and therefore it will keep changing from product to product, it's a sliding rule tax. And from that perspective, again, it has no certainty. It actually inherently will admit of variations. But the most important thing for me is this a signal that the GST is not all encompassing? That whenever the state needs something, whenever the center needs something, so center needs sources to pay compensation, you have a cess. Tomorrow if states say that I have some compelling reason why I want to bring a tax additional to the GST, again we will have to accommodate it. So if GST is about a unitary tax, then a cess in the very womb of a GST, to me, is really the wrong message.
On dual control, Rohan, clearly neither the states surely don't want to go.
To me, dual control is really a worry from 2 perspectives. One, Mr. Jaitley says each assessee will be dealt with by one officer. Now, let us say that one officer happens in the context of a intra-state transaction to represent the state, and he takes a view that the center doesn't adhere to. Is there going to be a potential conflict? Well, I have no clue. The second situation which sort of worries me is that when we talk of this dual control, when we talk of this massive change in the tax system, a key factor is going to be the knowledge and the sagacity of the tax administrator. And when you talk of dual control, and people are saying no, states must also tax services. The truth of the matter is, as you talk to officers in the state government level, many of them are candid enough to say that they just don't understand the whole concept of service taxation. Likewise, if you see this whole rate debate, this is now a goods debate. You haven't even got services into the fray. So my worry is, when you talk of dual control, inherently, you are sending out a message in terms of saying the states and center have not come together as one. That's disturbing. 2, the factor that several people who are to administer may not be completely at one with the law is also something which obviously is of some concern.
Sure. Gautam bhai, you have the car, the automobile sector, they are looking very closely at the rate. Some are already batting for a lower rate for some sub 4-meter cars, which will not be too different from the current excise structure. You have the gems and jewelry, which we are being told by we learn is going to be taxed at 4%, but they want a 1.5% tax. FMCG, all the big players have come out and told the newspapers, keep our rate between 16 to 18%. Gautam bhai, you want to add to that wish list?
Yeah, keep services back to what they were paying. Why should effectively, if the concept is that at the 26%, you'll make up from the current rate whatever advantage they are getting through a cess, then whoever is now going to pay more by being taxed at, say, the standard rate of 18 should be allowed to go back by getting some discount in a form or shape. So that is, everybody's going to have a wish list. This is going to be the moment you have multiple rates, these pressures and pulls are a part of life. They'll continue. They'll continue so long as rates are multiple. As and when you keep on narrowing this whole basket of rates, I think that will come to an end. It's a question of time. It is going to take a few years before that happens. But with that, I think all these pressures and pulls will come to an end.
Gautam bhai, before we get to the final comments, what would be, let's look forward. Let's say that this is all part of the game, that we should have been prepared for some tough negotiations on the table with so many interests to marry. What would be your advice to all the corporates, to your industry peers? How do you prepare for GST in the next 6 months? Every day is critical. How are you preparing for it? How would you advise others to prepare for it with so much uncertainty around?
I think the key factor in GST, more than all these will decide the economics. These will decide whether GST works good for you or you are hurt by it and your market is hurt by it and you are made worse off, and where you are vis-a-vis your competitors. But preparation is primarily a procedural and an administrative and an IT issue. It is not really an issue on these terms. So this will come later. Just now we need to concentrate on the procedures, the IT, the backbone, the systems, and start gearing up that part of it for GST. That itself is a tough task, and we need to spend the next 6 months after that.
Rohan bhai, my colleague Aditya, who's sitting here, he wants to ask you on classification. Is that going to be the next big turf war? Classification issues?
Absolutely. Because once you've got over the rate structure, whether you call it classification, whether you call it basketing, ultimately it will be about what goes into which rate structure. And from that perspective, yes, that will be another, to my mind, a pitch battle, probably even a little more intense than this. I guess the only situation is that those who are sitting in the council will sort of go on the basis of saying, look, whatever is the rate, whatever gets classified wherever, ultimately on a destination principle, I will get X tax. And to the extent that X is lesser than what I used to get, I will get compensation. So the battle really will be not so much in the GST Council, but it will be in the echelons of industry, where people will be concerned, where are they being classified, how are they being basketed. And from that perspective, I do believe that there must be some sort of a really deep interaction with industry post the principal rate structure being worked out, before you actually get into this situation of saying what get classified under what rate structure. Because, at that time, you could get rate structures which are very adverse to industry interest. And, in many cases, you will open up the gray market scenario. In many cases, you will therefore, force people into non-compliance. And the more that happens, the lesser the viability of GST will be, because GST is ultimately premised on the fact that every business is in the system and every transaction is in the system. So I think that stage of classifying or basketing is critical. And I do hope that that is not just seen as a center versus state issue. I do hope that the industry gets enough of an opportunity to truly engage with government on that issue.
Yeah. Gautam, my final word, 20 seconds.
No, I think it will be very difficult for industry to sit with government. There will be too many pressures and pulls. This is something which will come from government. You will have to accept it. It works far better that way. But overall, I think, as we said, even if it is 50%, it's a move in the right direction. Let's accept small things and small favors rather than hope for the best or the most perfect.
I think that's what I think both Gautam bhai and Rohan bhai are basically saying, that yes, it may not be the ideal GST that we were looking at, but something better than nothing. Let's get started. Between now and the next GST Council meeting in a fortnight's time, we have the Diwali. The Deepavali is known as the festival of lights. So hopefully everyone will see some light. It's not it's not so dark here in the tunnel, but hopefully everyone will see light and we will have some solution coming out of the November 4th meeting. And of course, we'll be back here live to dissect whatever is the final rates that the states and center hammer out. Thank you so much, Gautam bhai, Rohan bhai, for joining us. Thank you.
And just to wish everyone for Diwali, but Arun, as you rightly said, we hope there is light, we hope there is no fireworks.
Wishing everybody.
Yeah, thanks, Gautam bhai. Thank you.
If they are controlled, they are fine. Everyone enjoys it.
Gautam bhai always has the final word. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thank you.